Welcome back to Holiness to the Lord. And this is me getting to talk about the Layton House of the Lord dedication. Because it was great, and Elder Bednar presided, and it was interesting to hear, I believe it was Sister Bednar who said, go home, write down what you have been impressed with. Like, record your spiritual promptings and, like, what stood out to you. So this is me doing that. First, it was interesting that Elder Bednar, throughout his speaking time, he talked about not the Layton Temple, but the Layton House of the Lord. And I found this to be very interesting and cool. My wife said that it was because, well, she said that Elder Bednar had said that when they were first planning the temple, was that the planning committee, he told them there is power in referring it not as a temple, but as the house of the Lord, or the house of the Lord in this location. And that was really cool because I have gotten and seen criticism of the idea that temples were present throughout all of scriptures because it wasn't exactly how it is now. And that's true. But the concepts, the ideas, the importance of the house of the Lord, the presence of the Lord, entering back into his presence, needing to do the things he has commanded us to do to get to that point, to be worthy and willing of it, it really connected with me. So calling it the house of the Lord was really cool. I don't know if he referred to it as a temple at any time. What stood out to me specifically was Elder Bednar's comments. He had obviously the temple dedication prayer, but Elder Bednar told his own story of growing up in the tumultuous times he did, and specifically said, hey, rising generation, 8 to 18, and everyone else, listen to this story and don't focus on the details, and also don't think about it as my story. Think about it as a story where you can see yourself in, that you are the main person in this story, which, first off, excellent temple reference there. 10 out of 10. Snuck it in, and anyone 8 to 18 probably didn't even realize it, but 10 out of 10. He talked about he was born only 7 to 10 years after World War II ended. Talked about how it ended with atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He talked about growing up and being 10 years old when the Cuban Missile Crisis was happening. That he was just glued to his TV with his family, looking at all the Cold War stuff going on, and that all sides had nuclear capabilities, and just thinking to himself, like, this is it. The world is over. It's ending. I'll never get to meet my future wife. I'll never get to, like, live out everything that I should. I'll never get married, have kids, have a family. Like, I'll never be able to grow up. And as a 10-year-old, he just talked about how, like, that impacted everything when they would have nuclear bomb drills at school, not to, like, stay safe from a nuclear blast, but the explosion that comes out of a nuclear blast. Like, they'd pull these really heavy curtains across their windows, because if a big blast happens and they don't get hit with radiation, they'd still get hit with the shock wave that would blast out their windows and send glass flying, and that's no good. But he went over in detail, like, mostly that, like, the 10-year-old him thinking about how he could be vaporized at any moment. And that was freaky. He talked about how he grew up in the Bay Area. And he talked about how Berkeley was crazy. That it was a crazy time in history. 60s going into 70s, how, like, he remembers the JFK assassination, the assassination of the President of the United States. Martin Luther King Jr. was also assassinated. He talked about the race riots. And he brought it back to the rising generation, 8 to 18. He's like, does that sound familiar? Here we've got riots every day, someplace. We've got a war in the Middle East. We've got a war in Ukraine. And it's just, life seems crazy. But he just talked about his experience with the temple growing up. And it was cool to hear his wife contribute and talk about how Elder Bednar had a mother who was active in the church and who had a testimony, but a father who didn't. But that didn't deter him. He was growing up in a very crazy place to be in California for the time he was, with not even a full structure of support for his faith, but that he turned out so he's an apostle. He did okay for himself. But how much of a blessing it is that you don't have to have the perfect circumstances, and the world can be a really crazy place. But that doesn't need to stop anybody or anything from developing their testimony, from having the peace in Christ, from having the anchor of the soul that is Christ, his atonement, and his house, the house of the Lord. And there were more things he talked about and other speakers, but that's what really stood out to me. I appreciated hearing an apostle very relatably talking about the upheavals, the craziness of life, the uncertainty of the world, and the peace and certainty that the house of the Lord brings. So I just wanted to record that and share that. So thanks, and I'll see you next time.